3 things INFJs should never do. Number 1, INFJs should never live with difficult and contentious people. Some types, weird as it might sound, can actually derive a lot of value, and fun even, from living with difficult, contentious, and challenging people. ENTPs, for example, are a type I've seen relish this, being able to see how those interactions are interesting learning experiences, even if they're objectively not pleasant interactions. INFJs, on the other hand, are going to be deeply drained by this. When you are a high extroverted feeling type, you don't just have a preference for harmony, you have a hypersensitivity to bad feeling, awkwardness, contentiousness, social disruption, and conflict. I would go as far as to say that INFJs experience a kind of physical pain when encountering these situations. Without that physiological discomfort, there wouldn't be the requisite impetus for INFJs to take action to bring about rapport, goodwill, and peacefulness. It needs to hurt, otherwise why do anything about it? Based on that, being around people who are argumentative, constantly involved in drama, and just shrouded in bad feeling is going to be exceptionally unpleasant for INFJs. Yes, they can make great peacemakers and unifiers, but existing in that state of conflict long term will be disastrous. My ENTP friend will often tell me about awkward, difficult, and in his view, totally hilarious interactions that he gets into with people. To him, there's lots to be gained there about human nature and psychology. Obviously, both of those things captivate INFJs too, but they like to go about learning that stuff in very different ways. Whereas an ENTP might find that flatmate or colleague who is constantly combative with them to be entertaining and energizing, for INFJs, it will have a much more withering effect. When it comes to your job and your career, you need to play politics to a certain extent and tolerate difficult people and work with them or around them, as the case may be. But for INFJs, when it comes to living arrangements, I would strongly try to avoid getting stuck with difficult, argumentative, combative, and drama-attracting or inciting people. As is the case for all introverts, the home is quite a sacred place where you can recover and recharge. As I've mentioned before, INFJs are like sponges for other people's emotions. Even if they are just overhearing arguments between others, it will take a toll if it's a regular thing. Number 2. INFJs should never exist in environments or careers that require constant reactivity. Let me first describe the negative feelings and reactions that INFJs have to these kinds of things. If you're an INFJ, picture this scenario. You're sitting calmly, perhaps working on something, reading, chilling out, staring into the abyss, or pondering the deep mysteries of life. Then, the phone rings. Are you more likely to feel A. excited and intrigued at the prospect of who might be calling, or B. anxious and annoyed at having to deal with this unexpected situation? More often than not, it's going to be the latter. That sudden jolt of worry and fear is the thing that INFJs need to avoid. If they can orient themselves into situations and environments where they know in advance what's likely to happen, that's preferable. It's about limiting the amount of uncertainty. So what is an environment or career that requires reactivity? Well, on the topic of phone calls, something like customer service and dealing with people's complaints might be a bad one on multiple levels. But more generally, it's anything where unexpected events that force immediate action occur regularly. This can be anything from being interrupted by a lot of people, having emergency or crisis situations be a constant threat, having the goal, vision, or direction of what you're aiming for often changing, and so on. Also, importantly, it's situations that demand intense and quick organizational abilities. There's quite a famous puzzle that requires you to get a chicken, a fox, and grain across a river, and you can only take one of them each time. The aim is to get them all across without the fox eating the chicken, or the chicken eating the grain, or maybe the fox eating the chicken as well, or potentially the chicken eating the fox, depending on how aggressive the chicken is. That has always struck me as a very extroverted thinking kind of puzzle. It's about ordering things in such a way that gets the job done as efficiently and effectively as possible. INFJs can struggle with this kind of thinking, so they need to avoid being in situations that consistently demand it. Let's say you're an INFJ working at a startup. And, despite the company having an overall vision and goal, they spend a huge amount of their time pursuing random side projects because they need money from clients. As a result, you are constantly shifting your focus onto more short-term things, and it will feel chaotic. For INFJs to feel comfortable, they need to see that their actions and efforts are leading towards something, or are somehow unified in terms of their direction, as if each task is a step down the same path. They don't need to know exactly where something is leading, but if they feel like they are constantly changing paths in an almost random way, it's going to be really psychologically draining for them. These kinds of environments will leave INFJs feeling breathless and flustered more often than not. Even if you're an INFJ who can handle this because you've worked on this trait, it's still not your natural state of being, and there is a limit to how long we can sustain unnatural psychological states. INFJs have SE as their inferior function and TE as their blind spot function. So, needing to react, adapt, change course swiftly, and organize intensely and quickly on the fly aren't going to be huge strengths. Number 3. INFJs should never let their boundaries slide. This is something that a few types are susceptible to, INFJs especially. I'm talking specifically about boundaries with people. I'm not really able to justify this well using the functions, but it's something of a pattern that I've noticed. There's a few elements to this. The first is that INFJs, for reasons unknown to me, seem to easily attract and even get along with people who are, kind of dodgy or dark in certain ways. Perhaps the attraction is mutual, in fact, since INFJs tend to have a dark side, or at least an appreciation for the psychology of people on that side of the divide. INFJs tend to be non-judgmental in a way that comes across to other people quite noticeably. Maybe it's because they're often gentle and unassuming in their demeanor as well. People feel like they can approach them, or accost them, as the case may be. INFJs also tend to be quite agreeable and accommodating to others. If someone is about to launch into their life story 5 minutes after meeting them, INFJs aren't exactly going to stop them bluntly from doing so. When you think of the stereotype of INFJs ending up as people's therapists, they don't actually talk about whether the INFJ is enjoying being in that role. Generally, I believe they do enjoy it. But when things cross a certain threshold, they might find it difficult to say no to people, to hold firm to a boundary, or to even set a boundary in the first place. When you are naturally accommodating, and, as INFJs do, make other people feel listened to and seen, which is a rarity in modern life, it's hard to suddenly draw an abrupt line in the sand. To others, it might seem totally out of character, like a 180 flip, not dissimilar to when an introvert has run out of social stamina. Others might see them as suddenly cranky, annoyed, or aloof out of nowhere. When a boundary starts to erode, it's hard to refortify and repair it. It's far better to not let them slide in the first place. This isn't always easy for INFJs. Setting a boundary is an inherently disagreeable thing, after all, but my advice is to invest a great deal of time in figuring out where your boundaries are and holding firm to them. For some of the reasons I've mentioned, and probably many more, INFJs in their sometimes unconventional relationships with people can let boundaries slide, and it's always a mistake. If you're someone who watches the channel regularly and hasn't subscribed yet, then please do. It makes a big difference. If you are new to the channel, feel free to check out the many other videos on INFJs or other types before deciding whether you want to subscribe. And finally, if you are already subscribed, feel free to join me and many others deeper down the rabbit hole on the Love Who Discord server.